Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished his morning training routine in the academy courtyard. The wooden practice sword felt heavy in his calloused hands after 3 hours of non-stop drills. Around him, other novice warriors were equally exhausted, their breathing labored and their movements sluggish. The training master had been particularly harsh today, pushing them beyond their usual limits. As a third-year student at the Royal Military Academy, Marcus had grown confident in his abilities. He had consistently ranked in the top 5 of his class and had never lost a sparring match against his fellow students. His technique was solid, his footwork precise, and his strategic thinking sharp. Other students often sought his advice, and even some instructors had praised his natural talent with a blade. The academy was buzzing with excitement because tomorrow marked the annual Royal Guard exhibition. This prestigious event brought the kingdom's most elite warriors to demonstrate their skills and share knowledge with the next generation of fighters. Royal Guards were legendary figures, hand-picked by the king himself to protect the royal family and serve as the kingdom's ultimate defenders. They underwent years of rigorous training that made the academy's program look like child's play. Marcus had heard countless stories about these warriors. They could supposedly defeat 10 ordinary soldiers single-handedly, move with inhuman speed, and possess techniques passed down through generations of masters. Some said they trained in secret mountain monasteries, while others claimed they learned from ancient texts that contained forgotten fighting arts. Regardless of the truth behind these tales, one thing was certain: no royal guard had ever been defeated in public combat. During lunch, Marcus sat with his closest friends, discussing the upcoming exhibition. Thomas, a lanky boy from the northern provinces, was particularly excited about seeing the Guard's legendary sword forms. Sarah, one of the few female students in their year, wondered if she would ever be skilled enough to even apply for the Royal Guard selection trials. The conversation inevitably turned to speculation about how they would fare against such opponents. "I bet none of us could last even 30 seconds, Thomas said, biting into his bread roll. "Maybe not 30 seconds, but I think I could at least make it interesting," Marcus replied with a confident grin. His friends laughed, but there was something in Marcus's tone that suggested he wasn't entirely joking. Deep down, he had always wondered how his skills would measure against a true master. The academy had taught him well, but he craved a real test of his abilities. Fighting fellow students had become predictable, and even the instructors seemed to hold back during their demonstrations. That afternoon, Marcus couldn't concentrate on his history lessons about ancient battle tactics. His mind kept wandering to the exhibition and the possibility of witnessing true mastery in action. He had studied the royal guards from afar during previous ceremonies, analyzing their posture, their bearing, and the way they carried their weapons. Everything about them radiated controlled power and deadly precision. After classes ended, Marcus decided to spend extra time in the training hall. He practiced his forms with renewed intensity, imagining himself facing an opponent of legendary skill. His movements became sharper, his strikes more focused. Other students stopped their own training to watch, impressed by the sudden improvement in his technique. "You're looking good out there," called out Instructor Williams, the academy's senior swordmaster. "What's gotten into you today?" "Just preparing for tomorrow's exhibition, sir," Marcus replied, not breaking his rhythm. "Well, don't tire yourself out. You'll want to be fresh to appreciate what you're about to witness. These royal guards aren't like anything you've encountered before." As evening approached, Marcus finally put away his practice sword and headed to the dormitory. His roommate was already asleep, but Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring an opportunity to see the pinnacle of martial achievement. He wondered what it would feel like to face such a warrior, to test his skills against someone who represented the absolute best of their profession. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Part of him knew that challenging a royal guard would be foolish beyond measure. These were not academy instructors who would gently correct his mistakes or fellow students who shared his level of experience. These were battle-hardened warriors who had proven themselves worthy of protecting royalty. Yet another part of him, the part that had driven him to excel in every aspect of his training, whispered that he might surprise everyone. After all, he had surprised his instructors when he first arrived at the academy as an awkward farm boy. He had surprised his classmates by mastering advanced techniques faster than students who had trained since childhood. Why couldn't he surprise a royal guard? Marcus rolled over and tried to push these thoughts from his mind. Tomorrow's exhibition was meant to be educational, not a challenge. The royal guards would demonstrate their skills, answer questions, and perhaps share some wisdom with the eager students. It would be inappropriate and disrespectful to even suggest a sparring match. But as sleep finally began to claim him, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would be different from any exhibition he had previously attended. Something in his gut told him that this day would mark a turning point in his journey as a warrior. Whether that change would come from simple observation and learning or from something more direct remained to be seen. The last thing he remembered before drifting off was the weight of his practice sword in his hands and the imagined clash of steel against steel. In his dreams, he found himself standing across from a figure in the distinctive armor of a royal guard, both fighters poised and ready for battle. The dream felt so real that he could almost smell the leather of the armor and feel the tension in the air. When morning came, Marcus would wake with a sense of destiny calling to him, though he had no idea just how dramatically his life was about to change. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the Royal Military Academy as hundreds of students gathered in the grand courtyard for the exhibition. Marcus had barely slept, his mind racing with anticipation and nervous energy. He dressed carefully in his finest academy uniform, the dark blue fabric pressed and his boots polished to a mirror shine. Today felt different from any other day in his 3 years at the academy. The courtyard had been transformed overnight. Raised platforms provided elevated seating for distinguished guests, while colorful banners bearing the royal crest fluttered in the morning breeze. A large circular arena had been marked out in the center, surrounded by rope barriers to keep spectators at a safe distance. Academy staff bustled about making final preparations, their excitement evident in their quick movements and animated conversations. Marcus found his assigned spot among the third-year students, but his attention was immediately drawn to the group of figures standing near the main platform. 5 royal guards had arrived for the exhibition, and even from a distance they commanded attention. Their armor gleamed like liquid silver in the sunlight, and each carried weapons that looked both elegant and deadly. Unlike the standardized equipment used by regular soldiers, each guard's gear was unique, reflecting their individual fighting style and preferences. The lead guard was a woman of medium height with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her armor bore intricate engravings that seemed to tell stories of past battles, and a sword with an unusual curved crossguard hung at her side. The others varied in age and build, but all shared the same unmistakable bearing of absolute confidence and controlled power. Academy Commandant Harrison stepped forward to address the assembled crowd. His voice carried clearly across the courtyard as he welcomed the royal guards and explained the day's program. There would be demonstrations of various fighting techniques, discussions of advanced tactics, and opportunities for students to ask questions about military service and the path to becoming a royal guard. The first demonstration began with the youngest-looking guard, a man who appeared to be in his early 30s despite the wisdom in his dark eyes. He moved to the center of the arena carrying only a simple wooden staff, the same type used by first-year students for basic training. What followed was a display that left every observer speechless. The guard began with movements that seemed almost like dance, flowing from one position to another with liquid grace. Then, without warning, he exploded into action. The staff became a blur as he executed a sequence of strikes, blocks, and spins that would have overwhelmed multiple opponents. His technique was so advanced that Marcus struggled to follow the movements, each transition happening faster than the eye could track. When the demonstration ended, the courtyard erupted in thunderous applause. Students and instructors alike looked stunned by what they had witnessed. This was mastery beyond anything they had imagined possible, and it had been achieved with the most basic of weapons. The demonstrations continued throughout the morning, each more impressive than the last. The second guard showed how ordinary household items could become deadly weapons in skilled hands. The third demonstrated unarmed combat techniques that seemed to defy the laws of physics, throwing imaginary opponents with movements that looked effortless but generated tremendous force. During a brief intermission, Marcus noticed something. That made his heart race. The guards were not untouchable gods as he had imagined. They were human beings who had simply dedicated themselves completely to their craft. Yes, they were incredibly skilled, but they moved and breathed and spoke, just like anyone else. This realization planted a seed of possibility in his mind. The afternoon session began with the lead guard, Commander Elena Voss, taking center stage. She spoke about the philosophy behind Royal Guard training, emphasizing that technique alone was not enough. True mastery required understanding oneself, reading opponents, and adapting to any situation. Her words resonated deeply with Marcus, who had always approached his training with similar dedication to continuous improvement. Commander Voss then invited questions from the audience. Several students asked about training routines, weapon preferences, and the selection process for Royal Guard candidates. The answers were detailed and helpful, giving everyone valuable insights into the world of elite warriors. As the session continued, Marcus felt an almost irresistible urge building within him. He had spent years wondering about his true potential, always fighting opponents who were roughly his equal. The academy's structured environment had never provided a real test of his abilities. Here, standing before him, was the ultimate measuring stick for any warrior's skills. His hand began to rise almost of its own accord. Around him, other students were asking theoretical questions about combat philosophy and training methods. But Marcus had a different kind of question burning inside him, one that he knew was audacious beyond measure. "Commander Voss," he called, out, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard despite the nervousness he felt. "I was wondering, would it be possible for one of us students to have a friendly sparring match with one of the Royal Guards?" A hush fell over the entire assembly. Students turned to stare at Marcus with expressions ranging from admiration to horror. Several instructors looked like they wanted to sink into the ground from embarrassment. The idea of a mere academy student challenging a Royal Guard seemed not just presumptuous but almost insulting. Commander Voss studied Marcus for a long moment, her gray eyes seeming to peer directly into his soul. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of genuine curiosity rather than offense. "That's an interesting request, young man. What's your name?" "Marcus Thorne, ma'am, third-year student." "And why do you want to spar with one of us, Marcus Thorne?" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would determine whether his request was taken seriously or dismissed as youthful foolishness. He had to be honest about his motivations while remaining respectful. "Ma'am, I've been training here for 3 years, and I've always wondered what it would feel like to face a truly superior opponent. Not to prove myself or show off, but to learn something that can only be learned through direct experience. I understand that I would likely be defeated quickly, but I believe the lesson would be invaluable." The commander's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught a slight nod of approval from one of the other guards. His request had been made with the right spirit, focused on learning rather than ego or bravado. "An honest answer, Commander," Voss said finally. "Very well, Marcus Thorne. If your instructors approve, I'll grant your request for a friendly sparring match." The courtyard exploded into excited whispers and murmurs as Commander Voss's words sank in. Marcus felt his heart pounding so hard he was certain everyone around him could hear it. He had expected his request to be politely declined, or perhaps laughed off entirely. The fact that a Royal Guard had actually agreed to spar with him seemed almost impossible to believe. Commandant Harrison quickly stepped forward, his face showing a mixture of pride and concern. As the head of the academy, he was responsible for his students' safety, and the idea of one of them facing a Royal Guard in combat made him visibly nervous. However, he also recognized the incredible learning opportunity this represented. "Commander Voss, while I appreciate your willingness to accommodate our students' request, I must ensure that appropriate safety measures are in place. Perhaps we could modify the sparring parameters to minimize any risk of injury." Commander Voss nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, Commandant. We'll use practice weapons only, and the match will end at first clear point of contact or when I determine that young Marcus has learned what he came to learn. This is about education, not conquest." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been prepared to face whatever consequences came with his bold request. but the adults were handling the situation with wisdom and care. The match would be challenging but safe, exactly what he had hoped for. The preparations began immediately. Academy staff cleared a larger space in the arena and brought out padded practice weapons. Marcus was given time to warm up and prepare, mentally, while the other students formed an eager circle around the designated fighting area. Word had spread throughout the academy like wildfire, and even students who had been attending other activities came running to witness this unprecedented event. As Marcus loosened up with some basic exercises, he tried to calm his racing thoughts. This was what he had wanted, but now that it was actually happening, the magnitude of what he was about to attempt felt overwhelming. He would be facing someone whose skills were legendary, whose training had been far more intensive than anything he had experienced. Every rational part of his mind told him this was a foolish endeavor, yet something deeper kept him focused and determined. This was his chance to discover his true capabilities, to push beyond the comfortable boundaries of academy life and test himself against genuine excellence. Win or lose, he would learn something valuable about both combat and himself. Commander. Voss spent the preparation time speaking quietly with her fellow guards. Marcus couldn't hear their conversation, but he noticed that they seemed to be taking his challenge seriously, rather than treating it as a mere demonstration. This both honored and terrified him. He had expected to be humored like an overenthusiastic child, not regarded as a legitimate opponent worthy of tactical discussion. Thomas and Sarah pushed through the crowd to reach Marcus during his warm-up. Both looked concerned but supportive. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with worry. "It's not too late to change your mind. Nobody would think less of you." "I have to do this," Marcus replied, continuing his stretching routine. "I've been wondering about this moment for years. Better to know the truth than to always wonder what might have been." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, if you're determined to go through with it, at least try to last longer than 30 seconds. I've got a reputation to maintain as your friend." Despite his nerves, Marcus laughed. His friend's support meant more to him than they could know. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, he wouldn't be facing it alone. Instructor Williams approached with a practice sword, its blade blunted but perfectly balanced. "This is the finest training weapon we have," he said quietly. "It's as close to a real sword as you can get without the cutting edge. Use everything I've taught you, but remember that your opponent has forgotten more about swordplay than most of us will ever learn." Marcus accepted the weapon and tested its weight and balance. It felt good in his hands, familiar and reassuring. He had trained with similar swords thousands of times over the past 3 years. The techniques were ingrained in his muscle memory, ready to be called upon when needed. Commander Voss selected her own practice weapon, a sword similar to Marcus's but with a slightly different crossguard design. As she moved through a few practice swings, Marcus was struck by how effortless her movements appeared. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes. Every gesture served a purpose and flowed naturally into the next. The crowd had grown, to include what seemed like the entire academy population. Students pressed against the rope barriers. Instructors gathered in clusters, and even kitchen staff had emerged from their duties to witness the unprecedented event. The excitement was palpable, but so was the tension. Everyone understood they were about to see something that might never happen again. Commandant Harrison stepped into the center of the arena to address both participants. "This match will be conducted with honor and respect on both sides. The objective is learning, not victory. Commander Voss will moderate the engagement based on her assessment of safety and educational value. Are both participants ready?" Marcus took a deep breath and nodded. His mouth felt dry, but his hands were steady on his sword. Across from him, Commander Voss gave a slight bow, which he immediately returned. The gesture seemed to transform the moment from a spectacle into something more meaningful, a formal recognition of the serious nature of what was about to occur. "Very well," the commandant announced, stepping back to the edge of the arena. "Let the demonstration begin." Marcus raised his sword to a middle guard position, the same stance he had practiced countless times. Commander Voss assumed a similar, position, but something about her posture seemed different, more centered and relaxed. Her sword seemed to float in her hands rather than being gripped tightly. For a moment, both fighters simply studied each other, neither making the first move. Marcus used this time to observe his opponent's stance and breathing, looking for any clue about her intended strategy. Commander Voss seemed to be doing the same, her gray eyes calm but alert. The silence stretched on, broken only by the whispered conversations of spectators and the distant sounds of the Academy's daily activities. Marcus realized that this pause was itself part of the lesson. Real combat wasn't just about technique and speed. It was also about patience, timing, and the ability to read one's opponent. Finally, Marcus decided he needed to make the first move. He had requested this match, and it was his responsibility to engage. Taking a half step forward, he began a careful, probing attack toward Commander Voss's left side. Marcus's opening attack was textbook perfect, executed exactly as he had been taught. His blade moved in a smooth arc toward Commander Voss's left shoulder, the strike calculated to test her defenses without overcommitting to the assault. It was the kind of cautious, intelligent approach that had served him well in Academy sparring matches. Commander Voss's response was so subtle that many spectators probably missed it entirely. She didn't block his attack in the traditional sense, nor did she dodge dramatically out of the way. Instead, she simply shifted her weight slightly and moved her blade in a small circle that guided Marcus's sword harmlessly past her. The motion was so economical and precise that it looked almost effortless. Before Marcus could fully process what had happened, he found himself slightly off balance and overextended. His sword was pointing uselessly to the side while Commander Voss's blade hovered near his throat. She had turned his own attack against him using nothing more than proper timing and minimal movement. "Reset," Commander Voss said calmly, stepping back to her starting position. Marcus blinked in surprise. He had expected the match to end immediately with that first exchange, but the Royal Guard was giving him another chance. The crowd murmured, appreciatively, recognizing both the skill demonstrated and the mercy shown. This time Marcus approached more cautiously. He had learned that his opponent's defensive abilities were far beyond anything he had encountered before. Traditional attacks would be neutralized before they could develop any real threat. He needed to think differently, to be more creative in his approach. He feinted toward her right side, then quickly changed direction to attack from the left. This was a more advanced technique that often caught Academy opponents off guard. "Commander," Voss responded by taking a small step backward and to the side, creating distance while simultaneously positioning herself for a counterattack. Marcus pressed forward, trying to maintain the initiative through a series of linked attacks. His blade work was smooth and controlled, each strike flowing naturally into the next. For a few seconds he felt like he was actually engaging in real combat rather than being toyed with. But gradually, he began to notice something unsettling. While he was working harder and harder, breathing more heavily and moving with increasing urgency, Commander Voss seemed to be getting calmer and more relaxed. She was reading his patterns, learning his preferred techniques and preparing to turn his own energy against him. The realization came too late. As Marcus launched what he thought was a particularly clever combination attack, Commander Voss stepped inside his guard with fluid precision. Her movement was so fast and unexpected that Marcus barely saw it happening. One moment he was on the offensive, the next he was stumbling backward with her practice sword pressed gently against his chest. "Reset," she said again. But this time there was something different in her tone, not mockery or condescension, but a kind of analytical interest, as if she was beginning to see something in Marcus that warranted closer examination. The third exchange began with Marcus adopting a more defensive stance. He had learned that aggressive attacks were being countered easily, so perhaps a more patient approach would yield better results. He waited for Commander Voss to initiate the action, hoping to respond to her movements rather than creating his own vulnerabilities. Commander Voss seemed to approve of this strategic shift. She advanced slowly, her sword moving in small, testing motions. Marcus focused on maintaining proper distance and position, using footwork to keep himself safe while looking for opportunities to counter. For the first time in the match, Marcus felt like he was holding his own. He successfully defended against several probing attacks, his block solid and his positioning sound. The crowd began to murmur with excitement as the exchange continued longer than the previous ones. But then, Commander Voss did something that demonstrated the vast gulf between their skill levels. In the middle of what appeared to be a straightforward attack, she suddenly reversed direction and struck from an impossible angle. Her blade seemed to bend around Marcus's guard like a snake, touching his shoulder before he even realized the attack had begun. This time, she didn't call for a reset. Instead, she lowered her weapon and looked at Marcus with genuine interest. "Tell me, young man, how long have you been training with a sword?" Marcus, still breathing heavily from the exertion, managed to reply, 3 years here at the academy, ma'am. Some basic training before that with my father." "And who was your father, a soldier?" "A village blacksmith, ma'am, but he served in the border wars when he was younger." Commander Voss nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And during your time here, have you studied any fighting styles beyond the standard academy curriculum?" Marcus wasn't sure where this line of questioning was leading, but he answered honestly. "I've read everything in the academy library about swordplay and tactics. Sometimes I practice techniques I've read about, trying to understand how they might work." "Interesting." The Royal Guard turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue this demonstration, but I want you to observe something specific. Watch how this young man adapts to new information. Most fighters become predictable once you understand their training, but Marcus here keeps trying new approaches." Marcus felt a flush of pride at the praise, but also confusion. He hadn't felt like he was adapting particularly well. Each exchange had ended with him being thoroughly outmaneuvered. "Let's try something different," Commander Voss continued. "Marcus, I want you to forget everything you think you know about proper technique. Stop trying to fight the way you've been taught and just react instinctively. Trust your body to find solutions." This instruction went against everything Marcus had learned about combat. The academy emphasized discipline, proper form, and adherence to proven techniques. Fighting on instinct alone seemed like a recipe for disaster. But as he looked into Commander Voss's eyes, he saw something that gave him confidence. She wasn't setting him up for failure or humiliation. This was still a teaching moment, and she was trying to show him something important about his own capabilities. Marcus took a deep breath and tried to empty his mind of all the rules and restrictions he had internalized over years of formal training. When Commander Voss raised her sword to signal the continuation of their match, he didn't think about proper stance or approved techniques. He just moved. What happened next surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. Instead of the careful, calculated movements he had been using, his body flowed like water around Commander Voss's attacks. He found himself in positions he had never practiced, using combinations he had never studied. His sword seemed to move independently of conscious thought, guided by pure instinct and reaction. For the first time in the match, Commander Voss had to work harder. Her attacks, while still superior, weren't ending the exchanges immediately. Marcus was creating genuine challenges for her, forcing her to use more advanced techniques to maintain control of the fight. The crowd was completely silent now, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. The transformation in Marcus's fighting style was remarkable. Gone were the rigid academy forms and predictable sequences he had relied on during the first part of their match. Instead, his movements became fluid and improvisational, as if he was discovering new techniques in real time. His swordwork took on an almost dancing quality, weaving unpredictable patterns that kept Commander Voss genuinely engaged. What made this development even more extraordinary was that Marcus seemed unaware of how dramatically his approach had changed. He was fighting purely on instinct now, his conscious mind stepping aside to let his body respond naturally to the flow of combat. Years of training had built a foundation of muscle memory and spatial awareness that was now being expressed through pure, unfiltered reaction. Commander Voss found herself having to adapt her own strategy. The young man across from her was no longer the technically proficient but predictable student she had been testing. This new version of Marcus created problems she hadn't anticipated, forcing her to use techniques she typically reserved for much more experienced opponents. During one particularly intense exchange, Marcus executed a move that made several of the watching instructors gasp in surprise. He somehow managed to spiral his blade around Commander Voss's guard in a manner that shouldn't have been possible, given their relative positions. The attack didn't succeed, but it came closer to finding its mark than anything he had attempted during their structured exchanges. "Fascinating," Commander Voss murmured, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Where did that technique come from?" "I don't know," Marcus replied honestly, his breathing heavy but controlled. "It just felt like the right thing to do in that moment." The Royal Guard smiled for the first time during their match. "That, young man, is the beginning of true mastery. Technique is important, but real combat requires the ability to transcend formal training and respond to each unique situation." Their next exchange lasted longer than all the previous ones combined. Marcus had found a rhythm that allowed him to stay competitive, while Commander Voss adjusted her own approach to maintain the educational value of the demonstration. She could have ended the match at any time, but something about the students' rapid adaptation had captured her interest. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the two fighters engaged in what had become a genuine contest, rather than a simple demonstration. Academy students who had trained alongside Marcus for years barely recognized the warrior they were seeing. Even the instructors looked amazed by the level of skill their student was displaying. But perhaps the most surprised person in the courtyard was Marcus himself. With each passing moment, he felt more connected to his sword and more aware of the subtle currents of combat. He began to sense Commander Voss's intentions before she acted on them, reading her body language and energy in ways he had never experienced before. During a brief pause in their engagement, Commander Voss studied Marcus with the intense focus she typically reserved for serious opponents. "Tell me," she said, "have you ever experienced combat outside of training scenarios?" Marcus shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just academy sparring and some friendly matches with local fighters during visits home." "Remarkable. What you're demonstrating right now typically only emerges in warriors who have been tested in real battles. You're accessing abilities that most people never discover, even with years of formal training." The implications of her words sent a ripple of excitement through the assembled crowd. If Commander Voss was impressed by a student's performance, that student possessed exceptional natural talent. Royal Guards didn't offer praise lightly or for merely competent technique. As their match continued, Marcus began to understand something profound about the nature of combat. All the forms and techniques he had memorized were valuable, but they were just tools. The real art lay in knowing when to use them, when to modify them, and when to abandon them entirely in favor of pure, instinctive response. This realization seemed to unlock another level of ability within him. His movements became even more fluid and unpredictable. He started combining elements from different fighting styles he had studied, creating hybrid techniques that existed nowhere in any manual or textbook. Commander Voss responded by gradually increasing the intensity of her own efforts. What had begun as an educational demonstration had evolved into something approaching a genuine test of skill. She was no longer merely managing the engagement to ensure Marcus's safety and education. She was being forced to work to maintain her advantage. The change in dynamics didn't go unnoticed by the other Royal Guards. Marcus caught glimpses of them exchanging meaningful looks and whispering among themselves. Whatever was happening in this match was significant enough to capture the attention of some of the kingdom's most elite warriors. At one point, Marcus managed to execute a particularly complex sequence that forced Commander Voss to take several steps backward to maintain her defensive position. For just a moment, the initiative had shifted completely to him. The crowd erupted in spontaneous cheers, unable to contain their excitement at seeing their fellow student push a legendary Royal Guard onto the defensive. Commander Voss raised her hand to signal a brief pause. She was breathing more heavily, now though still far from exhausted. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out to the assembled crowd, "you are witnessing something truly special. This young man is demonstrating natural combat instincts that are extraordinarily rare." She turned, back to Marcus. "I want to try one final test. Everything we've done so far has been at a measured pace, allowing you time to think and react. Real combat doesn't always provide that luxury. Are you willing to experience what happens when the speed increases significantly? Marcus felt a thrill of both fear and excitement. He had no idea what he was capable of at higher speeds, but the opportunity to find out was irresistible. Yes, ma'am. I'm ready. Remember, Commander Voss said, trust your instincts completely. Don't try to think your way through what's about to happen. Just let your body respond naturally. She raised her sword and settled into a stance that Marcus recognized as preparation for serious combat. Her entire demeanor had shifted into something more focused and dangerous. The educational demonstration was about to become a genuine test of his newfound abilities. Marcus took a deep breath and tried to clear his mind of everything except the present moment. He could feel his heart pounding with anticipation, but beneath the nervousness was a growing sense of confidence. Whatever happened next, he would face it with everything he had learned about himself during this remarkable encounter. When Commander Voss attacked at full speed, the world seemed to slow down around Marcus. Her blade moved faster than anything he had ever encountered, but somehow his body was ready for it. Without conscious thought, he found himself moving in perfect harmony with her assault, his sword intercepting her strike with precision that surprised everyone watching, including himself. What followed was 30 seconds of combat so intense and beautiful that it left the entire academy speechless. Marcus and Commander Voss engaged in a dance of steel that showcased the very pinnacle of swordsmanship. Their blades met and separated in complex patterns, neither fighter able to gain a decisive advantage over the other. Marcus felt as though he had tapped into something far beyond his normal capabilities. Every movement flowed naturally from the last, his body responding to threats he hadn't even consciously recognized. He was operating on pure instinct now, and that instinct was proving remarkably sophisticated. Commander Voss, for her part, found herself genuinely challenged for the first time in months. The young man fighting her had somehow accessed a level of ability that typically took decades to develop. His techniques were unorthodox but devastatingly effective, forcing her to draw upon her deepest reserves of skill and experience. The exchange might have continued indefinitely, but it was interrupted by something nobody could have predicted. During a particularly complex sequence of attacks and counterattacks, Marcus executed a move that caused Commander Voss to stumble slightly. It wasn't enough to defeat her, but for just a moment, one of the kingdom's most elite warriors was off balance and vulnerable. The crowd's reaction was immediate and thunderous. They had just witnessed something that many had thought impossible. A student from the Royal Military Academy had actually managed to gain a temporary advantage over a royal guard in single combat. The cheering and shouting was so loud that it could be heard throughout the academy grounds. Commander Voss quickly recovered her footing, but the moment had not gone unnoticed by anyone present. She raised her hand to signal the end of their match, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The demonstration was over, but its impact was just beginning to be understood. "Remarkable," she said, loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. "In 20 years of service as a royal guard, I have rarely encountered such natural combat instincts. Marcus Thorne, you have a gift that extends far beyond normal training." The courtyard erupted in celebration as students and instructors alike rushed forward to congratulate Marcus. His friends Thomas and Sarah were among the first to reach him, their faces glowing with pride and amazement. Even the academy's most senior instructors looked at him with newfound respect and wonder. But perhaps the most significant reaction came from the other royal guards. They approached Marcus as a group, their expressions serious but approving. The gray-haired Commander Voss spoke for all of them when she said, "Young man, have you ever considered applying for Royal Guard training?" Marcus felt his world shift on its axis. The idea of joining the Royal Guards had always seemed like an impossible dream, something reserved for warriors with decades of experience and proven battlefield courage. The suggestion that he might actually be worthy of consideration was almost too overwhelming to process. I never thought I would be qualified," he managed to say. "Qualification can be developed," Commander Voss replied. "What you demonstrated today cannot be taught. You have instincts that most warriors never develop, regardless of how long they train. With proper guidance and experience, you could become something truly exceptional. Commandant Harrison stepped forward, his face showing a mixture of pride and amazement. Marcus, in all my years at this academy, I have never seen anything like what just happened. You've brought great honor to yourself and to this institution. Over the following hours, as the exhibition officially concluded and the crowds began to disperse, Marcus found himself at the center of countless conversations. Fellow students peppered him with questions about how he had managed to hold his own against a royal guard. Instructors who had taught him for years looked at him with new eyes, recognizing abilities they had never fully appreciated. But the most important conversation took place privately, as Commander Voss pulled Marcus aside for a serious discussion about his future. She explained that the Royal Guards were always seeking exceptional individuals, but that the training process was extraordinarily demanding. It would require leaving the academy, dedicating years to intensive preparation, and facing challenges that would test every aspect of his character. The choice is yours, she said. You can complete your studies here and pursue a normal military career, which would be perfectly honorable, or you can take a risk on something much more demanding, but potentially much more rewarding. Marcus thought about the moment during their match when everything had clicked into place, when he had felt truly alive and capable of anything. That feeling had been unlike anything he had ever experienced, and he knew he wanted to pursue it further. I would be honored to apply for Royal Guard training, he said. Commander Voss nodded approvingly. I thought you might say that. The formal application process will take several months and there are no guarantees. But based on what I saw today, I believe you have the potential to succeed. As evening fell over the academy, Marcus walked through the familiar corridors with a completely different perspective on his life and future. The sparring match that had begun as a simple request for education had revealed capabilities he never knew he possessed, and opened doors he had never imagined walking through. His friends and fellow students treated him with a mixture of admiration and awe. But Marcus remained grounded in the understanding that today had been just the beginning. True mastery would require years of dedication and sacrifice, assuming he was even accepted into the Royal Guard program. But as he lay in his dormitory bed that night, replaying every moment of his extraordinary match with Commander Voss, Marcus felt a deep sense of certainty about his path forward. He had discovered something profound about himself today, something that demanded to be explored and developed to its fullest potential. The novice who had requested a friendly sparring match with a Royal Guard had surprised everyone, including himself. More importantly, he had learned that his true journey as a warrior was just beginning. The outcome had indeed stunned everyone, but perhaps none more so than Marcus himself, who now faced a future filled with possibilities he had never dared to imagine.